starting with, both of you are record breakers. So I'll let you go first, and then Almis, we can go to you.
Your record, by the way, is a lot more impressive than mine. So I have a 12-year-old daughter, and we were lucky enough to go see Taylor Swift in Pittsburgh in June. And after that show, they announced that we had broken the attendance record for that stadium, which was a big deal. And it also mentioned that the second most well-attended show at that arena was a Garth Brooks concert that I was at a couple years also. So I don't actually know if this is at all like a usable life skill, but apparently if you have a big event and you need someone to come fill your seats, I'm your person, so.
Well, we are at capacity here, so.
Yes, we are, so all right. Yours is much more impressive and healthy.
So I, for 30 years, have been running marathons, and this spring finished my 73rd and 6th of the World Marathon Majors, which, as you mentioned, was also a record because it was the largest number of people who finished their 6th of the Marathon Majors at that particular event and was certified by the Guinness people.
Wow.
Impressive. As someone who walks shuffles on a treadmill for 2 miles a day, that is impressive.
Well, and thinking about it, since this is the first one of these events, I think we're also breaking the attendance record for MEF in Toronto. So
Exactly. So
you have to let your Guinness people know.
Yes.
Yes. Here we are, all of us.
Exactly. And so let's lay some groundwork here because it's fresh territory. Why don't we start with you, Almis? Like, what is it that EnStream does, the history, and let's start with that, and what is your role in the company?
So Canada is, by global standards, a relatively small market, and there's vast geographic territory to cover. So the Canadian carriers have had a history of collaborating on a number of fronts. And EnStream was formed to help deliver services on a cross-carrier basis that would be better consumed at an industry level rather than through unique bilateral connections. And from about 2016, we've been providing identity information from mobile accounts and device verifications and things like SIM swap notices to banks and other relying parties that are using the mobile device for either identity or two-factor authentication.
And I am the Vice President of Sales for the Americas for Telesign. So I have responsibility for our new business customers in North America and South America. And Telesign, if you're not familiar with us, we've actually been in really the identity and privacy space since 2005. We pioneered OTP, and over the last, I guess, almost 20 years, we've really expanded our business into other facets of identity. So we follow the entire customer journey from secure onboarding to ongoing account verification to secure messaging, customer engagement, and fraud prevention. So this topic is near and dear to us.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk about trust without talking about Telesign, vice versa.
That's what I like to say.
Yeah. So in terms of the challenges around data validation, I'll leave it to both of you to address this, but what are some of the challenges around reputation for both the consumer and the brand that you're seeing kind of come to a head as the industry kind of pushes the limits of what is a 30-year-old medium continues to do?
Sure, I can start with it. So I think that I think there's interesting statistics around trust between brands and consumers. So they say if a consumer trusts a brand, they're 7 times more likely to recommend them to a friend and to spend money with them, which is great. So you spend a lot of time and effort building up that trust, but it only takes one breach of trust, whether it's an account takeover or fraudulent transaction, to sever that, and then that consumer is 80% more likely to move on to a competitor. So I think it's a double-edged sword right now, because you have brands who are hyper-focused on establishing and keeping that trust, but at the same time they need to create frictionless customer experiences, because none of us have patience and everybody wants everything right now, and they want it to be accurate, they want it to be fast. And so I think there's this constant tension between accuracy and friction and protection that's happening on both sides of the equation. And I think as an industry, that's what we're faced with delivering right now. And it's it's this constant cat and mouse game of it's going to change by the day. So
I think trust is the key. I mean, ever since the first identity credentials were issued going back hundreds of years. The next step was counterfeit ones being used for fraudulent purposes, and it's been a cat and mouse game ever since. For, I guess, most of our lives, name and address was the way we would use to verify ourselves. Not many people use the address for communication right now. That's been replaced by phone number. The address kind of told you something about where that person was, whether it was a house or a post office box. The phone number now is entirely opaque. You don't know anything about it. So it would be helpful to know for the party whether it's a prepaid or postpaid account, whether it's an anonymous burner phone or whether it's a contracted account. And that information helps assess the validity of the customer relationship. And by way of challenges, again, Canada is a small market. We only provide Canadian information, so partners like Telesign are very important for us to reach global brands because most of this service is now international.
And that's a great point because it turns out, like in our prep call, we talked about this. You partner with pretty much every major CPaaS player in the industry. What is like a classic use case that would look like? Like where would they use it? What have you, and what's been surprising to you? Like, oh, I didn't expect this data to be used in different ways.
Well, the most surprising thing for me, well, again, going back to the marathon example, is this is definitely not a sprint. The surprising thing to me was just how long it takes to advance the ecosystem. And discussions with clients can take 1, 2, 3 years before you reach an implementation. I thought that virtually all of our business would be coming through aggregator partners, but because it's so slow, we found that we've been better. We've also been able to connect some domestic parties directly, but just the time that it takes and the effort that it takes to deploy these services has been the biggest surprise.
And one of the classic use cases I was surprised was the fact that you have actual accurate data between what's a prepaid and postpaid.
Oh, correct. Yeah. So I mean, just using the number to characterize the account. The analogy that I use is if it's a postpaid contracted customer, it's like a residential address. There's a verifiable entity behind it. If it's an anonymous prepaid phone, it's if someone wants to get financing for a new Mercedes and gives you a post office box, I mean, it should at least raise your eyebrows and ask for some additional information.
We just had a really interesting example of that. Actually, we work with a large Canadian bank, and they had a 33% increase in account takeovers over the last kind of 18 months. And what they noticed, which they could find, was that I think it was like 70% of the account takeovers were coming from a prepaid phone. And so their initial inclination was to block all prepaid phones, right? Okay, problem solved. Problem with that is that you block a whole bunch of good consumers. Like my in-laws live in Canada half the year, and they were like prime consumers, right? They would be who you would want to be one of your customers. Well, they use prepaid phones because they really don't like mobile phones. They think the whole thing is silly, and I think they've said for years it's going to go away. So it's like knowing that information is good, but then marrying that with additional risk signals about where's that phone number been used, how long has it been active, where is it being noticed in the ecosystem. Like if you can take additional signals and marry it with the type of contract and the type of device, like then you've really got a rock solid solution. So.
And so the question then is, how much of the sales process is education? Right, like people who don't know they could do what they do. And when I say sales, I'm assuming perspective, other aggregators, other CPaaS providers are also customers in addition to banks. And should they be customers? Should they be using more of these kind of services? The question is for both of you.
I think first of all, I was happy to hear that you were also having customer conversations that last 1, 2, and 3 years, because sometimes there are moments I feel like it is just us. I would answer that question. I think the education portion is at least 65% of the cycle. And, of course, that's changed a bit over the years because we have very educated consumers and partners, that are coming, by the time they engage with us, they've done some research, which is nice. Sometimes it's not good research, right? Sometimes we're correcting some of the things that they've learned along the way. But I think it's an enormous percentage of the sales cycle because and also it's, it's changing by the week. I mean, it's like whack-a-mole. We figure out how to fight one fraud and then another thing comes up. So I don't know, how would you answer it?
Well, I would just add on to what you've said and say from a client perspective, yes, education is important, and the more data, the better. So the more sources of data that you can have, the more you can cross-tabulate data and verify the accuracy of the information and look for discrepancies. Because we heard earlier today about applications for AI in accelerating the learning. Well, the fraudsters are using AI tools to accelerate how they are figuring out the fraud detection tools that are in place and how to circumvent them. So it is going to be a horse race, and the more you can bring to the table, the better off you'll be.
And in terms of greenfield, and this is a question I ask, and it's more timely also for folks like yourself who are setting the tone for the industry and the roadmap. What are some of the technologies when it comes to KYC that excites you? Like, is AI, like, I know it's a umbrella term and I hate using it in that sense, but are there technologies that are like, okay, if this part was added to the KYC perspective, we could actually make a difference in keeping messaging pristine?
Well, identity has historically boiled down to kind of what you are, what you have, and what you know. And the only verifiable credential that virtually everybody has is the SIM in the phone. And that is hardware. It's not easily spoofed, although you do have to check to see if the number has been ported or the SIM has been swapped, but that can be done. So if you can anchor the service into a credential that is linked to an identity, I think then you can layer on other services. But having some anchor point that is impervious to tampering, I think is a good foundation on which to build a verifiable customer relationship.
Because it's anchored to a physical.
Correct.
Yeah. I would actually agree with that as well, because I think that the known identifiers are consistent and are not going to change. But I agree. I was going to say SIM swap too, but but I do agree with it, because I think that it is something that really can't be tampered with, or they haven't figured out how to tamper with it yet. And we've even seen, like, we have a customer that we work with in the U.S. who is in the business of mobile phone repair and insurance, right? So you would think that, I don't know, if I was a fraudster, I wouldn't think like I should go attack them, because I would think that they would have this like great amount of data, which they do, yet they are viciously attacked on a daily basis. And the way that we're enabling them to start fighting back from some of this, because what they're seeing is they're actually seeing fraudsters who are registering broken devices using an activated number, then they're deactivating the number 20 seconds later, and then they're coming right back in, right? I mean, it's just like this cat and mouse game. But the SIM, actually, we can tell them that if there's been a SIM swap activity, when it happened, and we can identify that as they're coming in, right at the top of their waterfall. And it's like vastly reducing the amount of fraudulent claims. They're not completely gone, but it's going down. So I agree with you.
So then that brings me to my question. I do want to have questions from the audience. Speaking on the same aspect of innovation, how do you manage your own time? Like when you're selling for today and building a business for today at the same time building for tomorrow, walk us through how the day in your lives look like.
Sure. So there's a couple things that I prioritize. First for me always is employees. I mean, I have a large team, and so I prioritize like meetings with employees in the morning, because I feel like those are important and you should be fresh. And I usually have customer meetings in the afternoon. Not to say they're less important, but they're equally important. But I try to spend time at night. I read a lot of those emails. I run a sales organization, so I very much appreciate the effort it takes to get somebody's attention. I also am a human being, and I get super annoyed by all the messages that I get and some of the ways that people try to get to me. But actually, give you an example of that. I had somebody last week who called into our support organization, opened a support ticket that got escalated to our marketing team by this woman saying, "I've been trying to get a hold of Megan for months, and she's ignoring me." And it was somebody trying to sell me something. I didn't take a meeting with her, but I do spend a lot of time at night reading those messages, because I do think that innovation is out there, right? And we can't ignore everybody's efforts to get to people like us in this room and, you know, see new solutions. So like I look for very creative openings. I look for people who have spent just a little bit of time understanding who I am or what I do or what my company does, you know, and I try to respond to 1 or 2 of those a day. And you know, that's how I get a lot of knowledge of what's happening in our space. And so that's how I do it.
Well, I agree, employees are important, customers are important. The only thing I would add is that we are carrier owned. So I also spend, and we are a limited partnership of the 3 national wireless carriers. So a good part of my time is spent trying to keep alignment and interest across the 3 parties, none of whom really spend that much time in this space and none of whom intuitively want to do the same thing.
You are among your people, because here everyone has that challenge of getting carriers aligned. We love all of you, for the carriers in the room. With that, I would like to open up for questions. Is there questions in the audience? Did Ryan have a question? Well, on that note, I would really like to thank you for both for making it here.
Thanks for having us.
And hopefully we'll be chatting more.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.